In the early years of the Battle of the Atlantic, from 1939 through the spring of 1942, the German U-boat arm lived inside an illusion so strong and so comfortable that its officers came to believe it was permanent. The ocean was vast, the night was protective, Allied patrols were thin, and the surface of the Atlantic, cold, dark, and endless, belonged entirely to them. Their steel predators, Type 7s and Type 9s, spent the majority of their operational time not submerged, but running fast and free on the surface, where their diesel engines could breathe and their batteries could recharge. To the men of the U-Boot-Waffe, the surface was life, it was speed, it was mobility, and in those early years, it was safety. They called it the happy time. Convoys burned under moonlight, Allied merchantmen died by the dozens in one-sided hunts, and Admiral Karl Dönitz believed he was witnessing the beginning of Germany's decisive naval victory. In those days, a U-boat crew could surface in the middle of the night, scan the horizon with binoculars, and know with near certainty that nothing, no destroyer, no aircraft, could find them unless they were catastrophically unlucky. Darkness was impenetrable, radar was primitive, and Allied aircraft could not operate far enough into the mid-Atlantic to threaten them. A U-boat on the surface at night was almost untouchable. Its silhouette vanished into the blackness. Its watch crew could spot a ship's funnel smoke miles away, long before any enemy could see them. Their engines could drive them at 17 knots, faster than they could ever move underwater. A submerged U-boat was slow and almost blind, doomed to 3 or 4 knots and a few hours of battery life. So they stayed on the surface whenever possible, slipping through waves like ghostly predators. This doctrine was not reckless, it was rational. German submarines were designed for it. Their conning towers were narrow and hard to spot. Their diesel engines were powerful. Their tactics, night surface attacks, coordinated wolf packs guided by encrypted radio messages, were engineered for surface-running warfare. When U-boats attacked convoys in 1940 to 1941, they often did so brazenly from the surface, weaving between merchantmen, firing torpedoes at point-blank range, and disappearing into the night without ever diving. Convoy escorts lacked radar sensitive enough to find them. In the mid-Atlantic Black Pit, beyond range of British land-based aircraft, U-boats roamed freely and slaughtered shipping at industrial scale. Crews began to believe they were invincible. They carved tallies of sunken ships into wood panels inside their control rooms. They posed for photographs on conning towers under moonlight. They returned to French bases in Lorient and Saint-Nazaire as conquering heroes. German propaganda fed the illusion. Newsreels showed white-capped waves battering proud U-boat bows as sailors smoked on deck. Dönitz promised that 300 operational submarines would strangle Britain into submission. Allied countermeasures seemed clumsy, slow, and outdated. In 1941, U-boats sank merchant ships faster than the Allies could build them. And so the myth grew that the Atlantic was too big, too dark, too chaotic for any enemy technology to penetrate. Yet beneath that illusion, subtle cracks were forming. Allied scientists were experimenting with new radar wavelengths. The Royal Navy was testing HFDF sets to triangulate U-boat radio transmissions. American engineers were beginning to understand how microwave radar, still in its infancy, could detect even the small metallic signature of a submarine's conning tower. But to U-boat crews living inside the early war bubble of success, these developments were invisible. They believed their world would remain the same. The ocean as a cloak, the night as their fortress, and the surface as their natural domain. Throughout 1941 and into early 1942, nothing challenged that belief. In fact, it seemed reinforced. When Germany began attacking American coastal shipping after the U.S. entered the war, they experienced a second happy time. The American coast was poorly defended. Tankers burned off Cape Hatteras like floating torches. The United States had not yet implemented coastal blackouts. Ships sailed with lights on. Escorts were scarce. To the U-boat crews, it felt like confirmation that their tactics would carry them to victory. But the truth was already shifting. Slowly, quietly, methodically, the Allies were building a weapon that would overturn everything the U-boats believed about the ocean and their place in it. Not a new destroyer, not a new depth charge, not a new convoy formation. A sensor. A machine that could see through the night, through fog, through storms, through the very darkness the U-boats relied upon. By late 1942, American laboratories and British research teams had perfected centimetric radar, sets that operated on frequencies so short and so precise that a submarine's periscope or conning tower would light up on a radar screen like a flare against black water. And once this technology reached the long-range aircraft of the U.S. Navy and USAF Air Forces, B-24 Liberators, B-25 Mitchells,
and PBY-41 patrol bombers, the Atlantic began to change in ways U-boat crews could scarcely imagine. They didn't know it yet. They still surfaced at night confidently, binoculars scanning empty horizons. They still believed the darkness would protect them. They still trusted the doctrine that had carried them through 3 years of war. But the shift had begun, irreversible and total. In 1943, when the first U.S. aircraft equipped with APS-2 and APS-4 radar entered the hunt, the surface-running world of the U-boat would collapse overnight. The ocean that once hid them would become a transparent sheet of glass, and the men who once owned the night would discover that every moment above the waves had become a sentence of death.
By late 1942 and into early 1943, the slow, almost invisible scientific revolution underway in Allied laboratories began to reach the front line, and the effect on the Battle of the Atlantic was immediate, relentless, and devastating. The Germans did not yet understand it, but their world, the world of night attacks, surface running, and the comforting belief that darkness was their ally, was about to be annihilated by a technology so advanced that it changed the nature of naval warfare itself. This new weapon was centimetric radar, and once fitted to long-range American aircraft, it transformed the Atlantic from a vast sanctuary for submarines into a hunting ground where U-boats became the prey. For years, the U-boats had relied on the simple fact that the Allies could not see them. Early British radars operated at long wavelengths, which struggled to detect small objects like the narrow conning tower of a submarine. German engineers had tested radar detectors, such as METOX, that could pick up these long-wave emissions and warn U-boats to dive before aircraft arrived. But Allied scientists had been working on a new breakthrough, microwave frequency radar. Compact, powerful, and incredibly precise thanks to an invention called the cavity magnetron. This device allowed radars such as the APS-2, APS-3, and later APS-4 to emit high-frequency pulses that bounced off even the smallest exposed surfaces. Suddenly, the tiny silhouette of a U-boat's tower, or even the faint reflection from a periscope head, could be seen on a radar screen as a crisp, undeniable blip. The Americans installed these radars on the aircraft best suited to exploit them, the long-range patrol bombers that could finally close the deadly black pit in the mid-Atlantic. B-24 Liberators from the U.S. Army Air Forces, B-24 PB-4Y1 Liberators from the U.S. Navy, and even B-25 Mitchell units flying extended-range missions were now equipped with technology that allowed them to patrol in total darkness as if they were flying in daylight. A B-24 cruising at 6,000 feet could sweep the ocean below like a searchlight, detecting a U-boat 10 to 15 miles away, even in fog so thick that human eyes were useless. The effect on German submarine crews was catastrophic, though they did not realize it at first. A U-boat commander surfacing at night in 1941 could expect to stay on the waves for hours without fear of surprise. But by early 1943, that same commander was being tracked the moment his bow broke the surface. Aircraft approached silently from altitude, guided entirely by radar until the final seconds when the crew switched on their lee light or dove into an attack run. German lookouts heard nothing, no engine noise, no warning. One moment the ocean felt safe, the next, bombs were falling from unseen wings or depth charges were exploding alongside the hull. U-boat war diaries from this period describe these encounters with bewildered terror. One captain wrote, "Attacked out of total darkness, no visual contact, radar must be guiding them." Another noted, "We surfaced into a trap. The aircraft was already diving before we heard it." For the Allies, radar was more than a detection tool, it was the core of a new, integrated anti-submarine strategy. Aircraft equipped with APS-series radars patrolled previously unreachable regions from Iceland, Northern Ireland, Newfoundland, and the Azores. Escort carriers such as USS Bogue, USS Card, and USS Cretan extended radar hunting far beyond the range of land-based planes, launching radar-equipped Avengers and Wildcats that could seek out U-boats in storm, fog, or night. The Germans, believing they still controlled the mid-ocean gap, suddenly found it completely covered by American air power. The most brutal part of this shift was that German technology could not counter it. METOX, the radar detector crews relied upon for warning, was designed for early British long-wave radars, but the American APS-2 and APS-4 radars operated at microwave frequencies METOX could not detect at all. In effect, surface-running U-boats were being hunted by an enemy they could not sense. They were blind. The Allies were omniscient. Crews quickly realized something was wrong. Night after night, they were attacked with no warning. Aircraft seemed to materialize out of storms. Depth charge patterns were falling closer, more accurately, more frequently. Convoy after-action reports described U-boats being found not once, but repeatedly during the same night. Aircraft passing contact reports back and forth using radar, as if the ocean was nothing but clear glass. By the spring of 1943, U-boat losses spiked to levels unimaginable just months earlier. Patrols that once returned with multiple sinkings now limped home damaged or did not return at all. Crews surfaced only long enough to suck in air for the diesels and then dove immediately, terrified of lingering more than a few minutes. But submarines could not fight submerged. They needed hours on the surface every night to recharge batteries. Radar stole those hours. Radar stole the night. Radar stole the one thing U-boats needed most: invisibility. Behind these changes, inside planning rooms in Washington and London, Allied officers studied radar contact charts with growing confidence. They knew what the Germans would not accept until too late. The era of the surface-running submarine was over. Radar had turned the Atlantic into a transparent battlefield, and the hunters of 1941 had become the hunted of 1943. For U-boat crews, the realization came slowly, painfully, and always too late. The ocean that once sheltered them was now betraying them. The night that once protected them now illuminated them. Darkness itself had been conquered. The U-boats were still the same machines, their crews still courageous, their tactics still skilled, but the battlefield had changed, and they no longer understood it. The Atlantic, once their kingdom, had become a trap woven from microwave pulses they could not see or escape, and deep in their steel hulls, the first dread began to settle. Something fundamental had shifted. The enemy could now see everything.
By the spring and summer of 1943, the German U-boat arm was living through a nightmare it had never imagined possible. The ocean, once their sanctuary, had turned hostile. The night, once their shield, had betrayed them. And the very tactic that had made them deadly for 3 years, surfacing at night to recharge batteries, had become a death sentence. No announcement from Berlin declared this shift. No sudden event marked the turning point. It arrived silently, invisibly, delivered on microwave pulses from the bellies of American aircraft. One by one, U-boat commanders began to understand a horrifying truth. They were no longer hunters. They were targets. It began with stories, whispered across bunk rooms in Lorient and Saint-Nazaire, where crews preparing for patrol spoke with returning sailors whose faces looked older than their service records. We surfaced at 0200. Aircraft attacked before lookouts even spotted them. METOCs gave no warning. They see us in total darkness. At first, these accounts were dismissed as bad luck, an unlucky patrol, a bold Allied pilot, a fortunate guess. But as spring turned into early summer, the stories multiplied. Boats were being attacked in the mid-Atlantic, in fog, in storms, at night, precisely the conditions that once guaranteed survival. German logs from U-Boat Command, BDU, show a chilling pattern. Boats reported being forced underwater 5, 6, even 10 times per night, each time after surfacing for only minutes. Crews barely had time to run their diesels before radar-equipped B-24 Liberators or PB-4Y-1 patrol bombers descended out of nowhere, guided entirely by APS series airborne radar. There was no time to fire anti-aircraft guns, no time to maneuver, no time to react. The ocean had become a spotlight. Even U-boats operating in the notorious Black Pit, the mid-ocean gap once beyond the reach of Allied aircraft, found themselves ambushed. This was the most terrifying change of all. In 1941-42, the Black Pit was the U-boat paradise, a region where convoys crossed without air cover. But by mid-1943, American long-range liberators from Newfoundland, Iceland, and the Azores had sealed it off entirely. The last sanctuary was gone. The gap was closed. U-boat commanders began altering their routines. Some tried surfacing only during heavy weather, believing storms would shield them. But radar saw through rain and cloud with equal clarity. Others attempted crash recharges, surfacing for 15 or 20 minutes at a time, only to be caught anyway. Aircraft could sweep dozens of miles of ocean in minutes. Submarines could not outrun them. The psychological toll was immense. German lookouts once stood proudly on the conning tower, scanning the horizon with binoculars. By 1943, they climbed the ladder with dread, knowing their lives depended on spotting an aircraft faster than a machine designed precisely to defeat human eyesight. They rarely succeeded. Radar-equipped aircraft did not need moonlight or visibility. They needed only a blip on a screen. Crewmen began sleeping in short, broken rotations, constantly being jolted awake by crash dive alarms. Diesel mechanics cursed as batteries sat half-charged. Radio men feared sending even short encrypted messages because Allied HFDF stations triangulated them instantly. The U-boats were being hunted by mathematics. The attacks grew so frequent that captains wrote desperate entries in their KTB war diaries. One U-boat reported 16 air attacks in 36 hours. Another recorded being forced to dive 7 times in one night without completing a single recharge cycle. Again and again, commanders reported the same phrase, attacked without visual detection. That phrase became the death knell of the German surface-running doctrine. In May 1943, U-boat losses spiked catastrophically. 41 submarines sunk in a single month, the worst in Kriegsmarine history. It was a massacre. Boats disappeared with all hands. Patrol lines collapsed. Wolf packs dissolved as damaged submarines limped home or simply never returned. Inside U-boat command headquarters in Paris, Admiral Donitz stared at operational maps filled with red X's marking destroyed boats. For years, he believed that victory required only building more submarines. But now those submarines were dying faster than he could replace them. Radar had rewritten the rules of the ocean. And in the control rooms of U-boats still at sea, that realization spread like a crushing weight. Crews felt it in every crash dive, every moment of silence broken by distant aircraft engines, every hour spent submerged in stale air because surfacing meant death. They understood now what Donitz had begun to fear. Nothing was safe anymore. Not the night, not the fog, not the open ocean, not even the mid-Atlantic gap. The hunters had entered a battlefield they no longer recognized, against an enemy who could see everything while themselves saw nothing. And deep in the steel hulls of dozens of submarines, German sailors quietly accepted the truth their high command refused to say aloud. The age of the U-boat was ending, consumed not by depth charges alone, but by the invisible beams of American radar sweeping the Atlantic like an all-seeing eye.
By late 1943, German U-boat crews lived in a state of unbroken terror every time the order came to surface. What had once been the safest and most natural part of their routine, rising into the night to breathe fresh air, recharge batteries, and regain speed, had become a moment of pure vulnerability. The instant the conning tower broke the surface, the submarine was exposed, naked, and outlined by an invisible spotlight cast by the American radars sweeping endlessly above the Atlantic. The men could not see it. They had no device capable of detecting it, but the American APS-2, APS-3, and APS-4 radar sets saw them with flawless precision. And the result was a nightly slaughter unlike anything the U-boat WAF had ever imagined. A U-boat might surface into smooth, moonlit darkness with no sound but waves brushing the hull. The watch crew would scan the horizon, satisfied that no aircraft were visible. But at that very moment, somewhere 10 miles away and thousands of feet above, a U.S. Navy PB-4Y-1 patrol bomber would already be turning toward them. The radar operator would watch a tiny blip appear on his scope, confirm it was moving at the speed of a surfaced submarine, and speak calmly into his intercom.
Contact. Bearing 210. Range 12 miles. Commencing attack run. The U-boat would never know. The plane with throttle up, descending into the darkness with all lights off, engines masked by distance until the final seconds. And then, often without a single visual cue to the German side, depth charges or homing bombs would explode in a cascade of white fire, lighting the sky behind them. Many U-boats never completed their first recharge cycle. This was the horror of 1943-1944. The Germans tried desperately to adapt. They deployed METOX, a crude radar detector that worked against long-wave British sets. But American centimetric radar, operating at a wavelength of around 10 centimeters, was completely undetectable. METOX remained silent even as death was minutes away. Later detectors like Naxos helped slightly, but APS-4 radar still outranged them, and aircraft closed the gap far too quickly. For many U-boat crews, the psychological break came when they realized they were being attacked even in heavy weather. Waves crashed over the bow, spray drenched the watch crew, visibility dropped to zero, yet aircraft were still finding them. In earlier years, storms had been a refuge, but radar cared nothing for sea states. It saw through rain. It saw through cloud. It saw through fog. It saw everything. Records from the spring of 1944 are filled with chilling entries. Surfaced at 0200, aircraft attacked immediately. Dove, batteries at 18%. Unable to recharge, 2 attacks within 25 minutes. METOX silent, must assume enemy has new radar. Crew exhausted, no safe time to surface. The numbers tell the story. In 1943 alone, 242 U-boats were destroyed, the highest yearly total of the entire war. Many were lost without ever sighting the enemy that killed them. And the worst part was yet to come. American escort carriers, CVEs like USS Bogue, USS Card, USS Croatan, USS Core, and USS Block Island joined the hunt. These small, fast carriers launched radar-equipped Avengers and Wildcats that could strike hundreds of miles from the convoy. Now the mid-Atlantic was not only covered by land-based B-24s, but it was carpeted by carrier planes operating day and night. A surfaced U-boat in 1944 lived on average 20 minutes before detection. Some crews tried to fight back. They installed additional anti-aircraft guns on their decks and attempted to hold off attackers long enough to crash dive, but aviation ordnance had advanced too quickly. American pilots now dropped FIDO homing torpedoes, acoustic killers that chased U-boats underwater. There was no escape from radar above or torpedoes below. The situation became so desperate that German engineers rushed the snorkel into service, allowing U-boats to run diesels while submerged. But it arrived too late, and early models were unreliable, prone to breaking, sucking water into engines, or forcing crews to endure suffocating air quality. Worse, radar could still catch them when the snorkel mast briefly poked above the surface. Every technological solution Germany offered was outpaced by Allied innovation. Every tactic they tried collapsed into the relentless truth that radar had erased the boundary between night and day. Veterans of the U-boat fleet later described this period in stark, haunted language. One watch officer recalled, "We surfaced and died. That was the truth." Another said, "The Atlantic belonged to them. We only visitors." Dozens of memoirs echo the same revelation. The ocean no longer offered concealment. Every ripple of water, every faint metal echo, every break of the surface was visible to an enemy who had mastered the electromagnetic spectrum. To U-boat crews, it felt like supernatural omniscience. They called it the devil's eye, the ghost lamp, the Allied sixth sense. In reality, it was mathematics. Pulses of high-frequency radar bouncing off their steel hulls, returning to glowing cathode ray screens in the belly of an American bomber. By late 1944, the conclusion within the U-boat fleet was unavoidable. Their world was shrinking,
collapsing around them, killing them every time they tried to breathe. The night, which had once made them predators, was now a transparent killing field ruled entirely by the enemy. And every time a captain gave the order to surface, his men wondered if this would be the moment an aircraft that nobody had seen, nobody had heard, and nobody could detect would appear above them and end their patrol in fire. The slaughter continued. The fear grew. And deep inside their steel coffins, German sailors began to whisper the truth they had tried to ignore. Radar had made the ocean see-through. There was no hiding anymore.
By the beginning of 1944, the Battle of the Atlantic had entered a phase so lopsided, so technologically one-sided, that every German U-boat crew understood the truth long before Berlin admitted it. The war beneath the waves was lost. What destroyed the U-boats was not a single weapon, not a single battle, not even a single breakthrough. It was the convergence of three forces that transformed the ocean into a transparent battlefield. Long-range American aircraft carrying centimetric radar, escort carriers prowling the Atlantic with relentless air patrols, and a fully coordinated detection network of HF-DF radio triangulation, improved sonar, and radar-linked convoy escorts. Together, they crushed the U-boat arm so completely that Admiral Dönitz, its architect, later described the period as the death of my force. By 1944, radar-equipped B-24s flew from Newfoundland, the Azores, Iceland, Northern Ireland, and even from escort carriers operating deep in the mid-Atlantic, eliminating the air gap that U-boats once exploited. Every inch of ocean was now within striking distance of an aircraft whose radar could detect a sub from miles away. German captains reported surfacing only to be driven down again within minutes. If a boat lingered too long on the surface, a Liberator or PB-4Y1 would already be diving toward it. If it tried to escape underwater, the oxygen-starved crew could not outrun aerial radar working in perfect cooperation with destroyers equipped with new sonar and faster depth charges. The escort carriers were the final nail in the coffin. Ships like USS Bogue, USS Card, USS Block Island, USS Guadalcanal created mobile airfields that moved with the convoys, launching radar-equipped Avengers and Wildcats that could hunt continuously, day and night. These CVEs erased the U-boat's final refuge, mobility. No matter where a U-boat surfaced, a carrier might be close enough to launch an aircraft in minutes. In May 1943, escort carriers and their hunter-killer groups destroyed so many U-boats that Dönitz withdrew the entire fleet from the North Atlantic for the first time in the war. But when the boats returned, the situation was even worse. Even the technological saviors Germany rushed into service, like the Schnorkel or Snorkel, became symbols of futility. Schnorkels allowed U-boats to run diesels while submerged, reducing surface time, but they were fragile, noisy, and easily detected. Worse, early models caused dangerous carbon dioxide buildup inside the boat, leaving sailors faint, nauseous, and disoriented. And the moment the Schnorkel head broke the surface, American radar could still catch it. Crews described the feeling as suffocating. Submerged for long periods breathing stale air, yet surfacing brought certain death. One U-boat captain later said, "We were like a drowning man forced to choose between fire and water." Meanwhile, German losses spiraled. In 1943, 242 U-boats were sunk, the highest annual loss of the entire war. In 1944 and 1945, the rate grew even worse relative to the number of boats still operational. Young captains left Saint-Nazaire or Lorient knowing that their chances of returning were slim. Veterans who had survived the early happy times understood that that era was over forever. The ocean no longer belonged to them. It belonged to machines that could sense them before they sensed anything. Inside U-boat wardrooms, the mood changed from pride to fatalism. Officers who once boasted of tonnage sunk now whispered about radar sightings, surprise air attacks, and the impossibility of their mission. Sailors described the air of dread whenever the captain gave the order to surface. Men climbed the conning tower ladder with shaking hands. The instant the hatch opened, they braced not for wind or salt spray, but for the sudden, searing brightness of bombs falling from a plane none of them had seen. Logbooks captured the collapse of an entire strategy. Entries recorded batteries failing because recharging was impossible. Men collapsing from exhaustion during crash dives. Boats forced to abandon attacks halfway through because constant air harassment made torpedo approaches suicidal. Many logbooks contain a simple phrase repeated over and over: "Hunted from the moment we surfaced." By early 1945, even Dönitz was forced to admit privately that the U-boot Waffe had no path to victory. In March 1945, he wrote that Allied air radar had created a steel net across the Atlantic, and that every emerging submarine was instantly revealed. The phrase U-boat crews used was even more haunting. The Atlantic is a glass window. They meant it literally. The Americans could see everything. No wave, no cloud, no fog, no moonless night could hide them. Allied radar had turned the ocean into a transparent map filled with sharp, bright targets, and the U-boats were the brightest of all. As the final months of the war unfolded, the U-boat force existed mostly on paper. Newer Type 21 submarines, which might have changed the balance, arrived too late. The surviving boats spent most of their time submerged, not hunting but hiding, waiting for an end everyone knew was coming. When Germany finally surrendered in May 1945, dozens of U-boats emerged from the depths to surrender at sea. Their flags were tattered, their crews ghost-like, their fuel nearly gone, their mission long since impossible. Looking back, many surviving U-boat veterans agreed on the same moment when defeat became inevitable. Not when convoys improved, not when depth charges grew stronger, not when escort carriers appeared on the horizon. It was the moment American radar entered the Atlantic in force. The moment the night turned against them. The moment every surface run became a gamble against an enemy they could not see, hear, or detect. That was the time the U-boat war died, quietly, invisibly, mathematically, beneath pulses of radar energy sweeping across waves like an all-seeing eye.